back to the Board Game Code channel, and this is a preview of The Dead Keep. Hey there gamers, welcome back to the Board Game Code channel. I am Professor Meg, and this is a preview of The Dead Keep, this monster of a game. I usually sit in the center of this camera, but today I'm sitting next to my co-host, the box of The Dead Keep board game. So in front of me we have The Dead Keep by Simon Games. This is their newest project, where you can find the pre-order link down below. But apart from that, we also have some gameplays coming up, and speaking of, this is a sponsored game by Simon Games. So thank you to them for sponsoring, and please keep in mind this is a prototype copy, so not everything is completely fleshed out. This is prototype phase, but it is so far a very fun game, and we have playthroughs coming out for you, at least one, possibly two, and they were very entertaining to watch, I think. If I do say so myself. I don't even know how to flatter myself. I'm like, don't do it. Anyway, with that, we will jump into the preview of The Dead Keep. The Dead Keep by Simon Games is a game for 1 to 6 players. However, depending on the number of players, it is suggested to have 4 characters. For example, this was set up as a 2-player game, but there were 4 characters played, so that's how you kind of handle balancing like that, because if you play with less, it could be quite dangerous. Now, for those of you that are familiar with Zombicide by Simon Games, this has quite a few similarities, but it is honestly very different, and we're going to be going over that by showing you a preview of The Dead Keep. But I think one of the major differences is that you have a lot more that you can do with your characters, and it feels like you're doing a lot more damage to mitigate the situation and figuring out the different puzzles of the scenarios. Now, this is going to be a campaign-based game. There are campaign story arcs that you are able to play through. However, there are different scenarios that you're also able to just play, such as what you see in front of you. So it is able to be played in a variety of ways, but with that, you will be able to see different character growth, and you'll be able to have them be more and more powerful with what you're able to customize throughout the game. In The Dead Keep, you'll be setting up specific scenarios with which tiles to place where, and you'll be spawning a lot of enemies. In the beginning, there won't be too many. It'll be round after round, and you'll feel like you have everything under control, but pretty quickly the enemies will start spawning, both when you open doors and just round over round. There are also certain enemies that will spawn even more enemies, such as the counts, so it gets more and more dangerous as the game progresses. But with that, you're trying to accomplish different objectives by gathering them around the map and then fighting a final boss. Now, these bosses are quite formidable, and they are these huge miniatures that you'll be able to play as, but you also may have noticed that this is a higher elevation tile. So this tile is a drop higher than everything else, which will have a few different effects in the game. There's a ladder that you'll have to cross. You can see down but not up, but it also visually creates something very interesting for you, that when you start having a lot of these miniatures on the board, you have a lot of tactical decisions and just a really interesting puzzle for your brain as you're looking around the board and trying to decide what to do. Now, in The Dead Keep, all players will have for each character these character trays. In the character trays, you'll have your character card, which has a lot going on, and it tells you the abilities that your character currently has available. On top of that, you'll have slots for your different armor and weapons and items that you're holding, and also a health track, which is a major difference from Zombicide. In this game, you'll have this health track, and you'll have 10 health, and there are also potions. So if anyone dies before you have a potion, you automatically lose the game. However, there are these potion tiles that you are able to uncover, and once you do so, you have potions available that if anyone dies, you are able to revive them and continue playing the game. But throughout the game, you'll gain an experience point for every point of damage that you do. So every time that you fight an enemy, damage will stack, and for every time you do damage to them, you will be able to gain an AP point. When you do this, it will unlock certain abilities, and you start in the blue section. After that, you enter the yellow section, and you'll be able to have an additional action. After entering the yellow section, you'll enter the orange section, and that's when you'll have a choice to either gain an additional ability, for example, spellcaster or sprint, or you'll be able to buff a different ability that you already had. For example, Lothar gets an additional melee action, and Archer gets a free move action instead. Then, if you finally get to the final end for your character, which would be 43 AP points, you would be able to choose and add something quite formidable. For example, you could add +2 dice to the melee attack if you spend a mana, +1 free combat action or +1 to dice rolls for melee. Now you may have heard me say mana because there is mana in the game. That's this resource over here, and you're going to be gaining mana in these green areas. Now you start with some mana, which is very useful, but the best way to be gaining it is to be in these different areas, and you'll be using it not only for your specific abilities such as I listed, but you'll also have these different cards that are your items, and you'll be attacking and spending the mana either to use the item at all or to augment the item. For example, you may have a sword that will allow you to roll more hits, and it will also go through a further armor penetration. So if you spend a mana, instead of rolling 2 dice, you'll be able to roll 3, and instead of going to a 1 armor level enemy, you'll be able to go through a 2 armor level enemy instead. That's one way to spend mana, but some items will require mana just to be able to use them at all. That means to attack with the mana, you'll have to be able to spend it, but these items also have special effects that are quite useful. There are some that will stop regeneration, which is the enemies will heal at the end of every turn, and there are some that will add additional effects for you, such as not spending mana if you're standing in the mist. Now that's a bit about your players, and the turn order will be going around between the different players. You'll be gaining these different cards by looting when the enemies are killed, and you'll be performing search actions where these tokens are looted. So with that, let's talk about these enemies, because they are so cool and fun and unique to Dead Keep that they are just really, really exciting. So when you encounter the enemies, they will spawn in the different areas. They have their spawn points, but there are also certain enemies, such as this guy, who will spawn additional enemies. He is the bishop, and you can see here he's quite a meanie. Now the most basic of the miniatures is the footman. They're pretty easy to take out, they have 1 health, but there are others that are more and more formidable, such as these ones which are very special and they will summon more people. But there are also, for example, your horsemen. Your horsemen will move 2, and they also require a 2 armor level to be able to kill. Now there are also shadow guards and things like that, but you'll have these other miniatures pulled into play that are monsters. For example, we have our wyvern here, we have our troll and our hog rider. We have both the Baba Yagas and the warhog who is here. We also have our minotaur who was previously killed. So you can see that there are other ones that are summoned to the board that have different special effects. Now some of them have special effects. The warhog, he's just scary. The Baba Yagas get to move around the board. But they are different to take out, and they can really change up the game on you when they surprise and show up at a different spawn point. Now when you are spawning enemies, you're doing so when you open the different doors and when you go to the different points, but you're drawing from these decks. So there are building enemies and street enemies, so they do depend on where they would be, depending on if they're showing up in the street or the buildings. But they also start with stage 1. So the stage 1 ones are a bit easier, and then as you drop further into the deck, there's 1s, 2s, 3s, etc. But they get more and more formidable and larger groups as you start going through these different decks, making it even scarier as the game progresses, as if that isn't hard enough. Because when you draw these enemy decks, you're going to be spawning based on the level of the highest level of the AP points of the heroes in play. So, for example, if you're currently in the yellow, this would be spawning 2 of the footmen. However, you would spawn 3 if someone is in the orange. So more and more will be spawning, and you have to be very careful that you are getting everyone AP at the same amount of time, because if someone becomes more powerful than everyone else, then more enemies will be spawning and you can quickly become overwhelmed and lose the entire scenario. Now, on top of the monsters, which are those red figures that I showed you, there's also a boss for this scenario. So for the boss for this current scenario that is set up is an Elder Troll. Now, that means that he is a bit more powerful than any of the other monsters that are out on the board. The other monsters will spawn around here, but he started up here in this tower. He also has this card available. He starts with 10 health, But he also starts with certain stage cards. So, for example, he has that 10 health, but the first time that he is killed, you would draw a stage card. Now, our top stage card says, spawn 2 horsemen in the boss's zone. So, 2 horsemen would automatically be spawned in the boss's zone. I don't have any, but here are some to grab. And then the boss heals all of its wounds and does not move. So it would heal back up to 10, not move, and likely attack the heroes again. Another example of a stage card is spawn 2 horsemen in the boss's zone. Then the boss heals all of its wounds and is moved to the zone with the most survivors. In case of a tie, the players choose. So for example, if you were shooting from range trying to have an advantage, he would then move directly onto your spot, forcing you to either try to move away from him or attack him there, and he would also be damaging you in future turns. So that's a way that the boss becomes more and more powerful, but there are also doom tokens. The game will be telling you at different points to put certain doom tokens into play, and when they're added, every time that you add 5, you add another stage card to the boss, which means it gains another 10 health, etc., however much it might have, and making it harder and harder to kill, meaning that the doom is going to catch up with you, and basically the game feels like it is closing in around you as it progresses. You have more and more enemies showing up, the boss is getting even stronger, then it gives you a real sense of urgency to level the team completely equally among each other and try to head toward your goals as quickly as possible to be able to complete the game. One other detail to go through is when you kill all enemies when they're in a specific zone, that is when they will drop these loot tokens. Once you drop that loot token, you will drop from the necrotic equipment deck, and you will get certain items. You'll be able to draw those. You'll draw 1 card, or if you have a special ability such as Archer, you'll be able to draw 2 cards. But the moment that you draw one of these crawlers, they would then show up in your spot instead, and that loot token would then be removed. There's also the necrotic artifacts, and those are what is dropped when the monsters are killed on the board instead. Overall, I feel that the Dead Keep was familiar to Zombicide. There were a lot of rules that I felt I was able to jump right into, and that overwhelming sense of all of these miniatures showing up on the board, I did feel like I was able to know a little bit what I was going to do, and it was pretty easy to jump into and accessible. That being said, I do feel it was a very different game. This does feel very much like a dungeon crawler where I keep knocking these poor guys over. It felt very much like a dungeon crawler where I felt very strong with a lot of health. I was able to take certain hits and fight certain monsters and enemies and be able to gain certain artifacts and items that I feel like I saw a lot more items throughout this game. Something that has me very intrigued is the campaign version of this, which I'm very excited to check out. So with that, be sure to check out the link down below that you can pre-order the game and see everything that Simon has planned for the Dead Keep. As a reminder, this has been a sponsored preview, and this is a prototype copy with everything that you see on the board. However, you can check out their campaign page for everything specific that they have planned. I do believe that there are some expansions that you're able to get with additional miniatures, so be sure to check that out. Thank you all for watching the Board Game Code channel. I've been Professor Meg, and thank you all for watching. I think I've thanked you a lot, but I'll see you next time. Bye!